Hey, welcome back. And if you are leading a church and you're carrying any frustration around giving, generosity right now, this conversation is definitely for you. Today, we're going to talk about non-givers, and not the people who will never engage no matter what. Now, may be in your church too, but I mean the people who are sitting in your church who just haven't taken a first step financially. And here's the issue: you just don't really know why. Most pastors, I think, assume, and I did too, that the answer is really just that these people are resistant. And, that assumption isn't always true. In fact, it's almost never true. But the assumption is costing you and them more than maybe any of us realize. So let's jump into the non giver conversation. When generosity numbers are low, especially with that group of people, the non-givers, the kind of instinct is really kind of universal. We just need to push harder, create more urgency, better sermons, better illustrations, bigger vision moments, better stories, more tears. And if we can just get them to feel it, then their response will follow. And I have been in those conversations, right? I have watched very gifted communicators bring everything they had to a generosity message or a inspirational moment and just walk away feeling confused about why hardly anyone, stepped forward. Why didn't the needle move more? And here's what nobody in the room was kind of really willing to say, and for makes sense, we wouldn't say this out loud to the person who just gave that message, but the message was fine, the message was great, but the design was wrong. The design was wrong. Resistance and like waiting, they kind of look identical from the stage. Think about it. A person who looks resistant might just be waiting, but those two things really look the same from the platform. Like from where you're standing, a person who is frozen looks kind of like or a lot like a person who is fighting you. But those are completely different problems, right? When you push at someone who is resistant, you might eventually wear them down. But when you push at someone who is uncertain and afraid, you get no movement. In fact, you create resistance. You get a deeper freeze. You get confirmation, really, of everything they've already feared about being, the church just asking for money and the church only cares about what they could do for the church. Most non-givers, I hope you know this, they're not fighting you. They're just uncertain. And that's very different. They're not resistant. They're just uncertain. They don't know what to do with your ask. So they do nothing. Now, let me kind of walk you through what's actually happening in the room when you make a generosity ask to this group of people, okay, what they're hearing. So the first barrier really is a financial fear. It's a financial barrier. For a significant portion of your congregation, and this is just true, right? We know this. Money is already a source of shame before they even sat down in your service on a Sunday. I mean, they're carrying debt, they're managing tight margin or no margin. They feel like they're barely keeping up with things as they are. So when you ask them to give before they feel financially safe, you are really not producing conviction. You're just producing confirmation, right? Confirmation that the church is just one more place in their life where they don't have what it takes. That's the shame they feel. And that is not the outcome that we are after, right? Um, and here's the reality: a more compelling sermon doesn't fix it. The second barrier is really past church baggage. Now, this one doesn't surprise any of us, right? But it should a little bit. Some of the people that are sitting in your church who have never given have watched churches mishandle money. Maybe they were even behind the curtain when some of that got revealed. They have seen buildings funded while people went unserved. They've watched institutional priorities kind of crowd out maybe human ones. So here's the distinction that really matters for these people. They're not skeptical of God. They're just skeptical of institutions. Okay, so functionally, they are skeptical of you. And this is a trust problem, not a generosity problem. So you cannot preach your way through a trust deficit. Here's the third barrier, right? Third one is just lack of clarity. Many people in your church genuinely don't know where their giving goes or what it does. They just don't really know. Like they don't know what happens when a person gives. They don't know whether $20 matters the same as $200. They really have just never been told, like in concrete terms, what participation costs and what it produces. And nobody's ever told them. So you assumed they understood because you live inside the ecosystem. You live inside the system. They don't. So they need it explained. Now, here's what's interesting. All three of those barriers share one thing. None of them respond to pressure, but they all three do respond to clarity and safety. So let me add something here. I write about all this stuff too on my blog, but let me talk about something here. I didn't write about this part in the blog because I think it kind of changes how we can see the entire problem. Generosity, it really is a discipleship progression. This is not a stewardship event, right? Most churches treat giving as something that happens after someone's spiritual journey is sufficiently advanced, right? So again, it's like that's why we use the word tithe sometimes. We assume, and it does take some spiritual formation for that, but get them saved is maybe what you would never say this out loud, but the heartbeat, get them saved, get them serving, and eventually they'll give. And there is something kind of normative about that direction, but here's the problem. We're never actually designing an on-ramp for people to get involved before maybe that maturity kicks in. It's like we assume people will just figure out how to start. And when they don't, we just assume that they don't care enough or they're resistant. What I have found working with churches at really various sizes and lots of denominations is that the design of the first giving experience determines whether someone gives again. It is not the preaching, it's not the vision, it's not the story, it is the design of the first giving moment. And think about what is actually, or how it actually feels to be in your church and be uncertain about giving. Now, you're going to have to use your imagination. Again, you live inside this ecosystem, right? And for you, if I can use the phrase, it's an echo chamber. So it's hard to get out of that bubble and pretend what it might feel like, but try to pretend what it feels like to be in your church. Maybe you're, a guest, you've been there a handful of times, or maybe you've been there for a while, but you are uncertain about giving. And maybe it's because of one of those three barriers we talked about. So you have heard the appeals. You've seen the budget graphics on screen. Maybe you've even kind of felt some sort of pull in your heart during a message or during a moment, but you just haven't pulled the trigger. You don't give because you don't know exactly what happens when you do. And that uncertainty is enough to keep you from moving forward. And here's the thing, that is not a spiritual failure. It's a design failure. And when we can understand that, our job shifts a little bit. So you're not trying to convince uncertain people to take a big risk. What we're trying to do is design a first step that is small enough to take and real enough to matter. So let me make this just really specific. There's a specific action I'd love for you to consider. I want to say take, but at least consider it before your next Sunday service. All right, here it is. I'd love for you to just stop waiting for the next generosity series or message. Stop waiting for a new capital campaign moment, all that. You don't need any of that. What I would love for you to do is just identify one giving opportunity that is completely separate from your general budget. Okay, just one giving opportunity for your church, for the people at your church, that is completely separate from your operational giving, your operational budget. Now, here's a few places you can kind of look to find this, okay? Maybe it's a community need in your church. And it could be a place that your church community is already involved with, serving at, or maybe even somewhat helping fund. It could be like maybe a scholarship fund for students who needs something, needs like a camp scholarship or school supplies for a partnered local school or family in your community, or again, so many things this could be, right? But is there something in your community that is not directly connected to your operational budget? And here's the kind of the caveat. It really needs to be something your people can see. And it should have a number attached. It should feel real and accessible, not abstract. And what I want you to do, once you've identified it, you make the ask small enough that someone who has never given before could say yes without it feeling like a major financial decision for them. We want to keep it very specific, and we want to help them understand exactly what we want them to do, why we want them to give, and what the money will be used for. And listen, don't attach it to a sermon series. Don't make it like the emotional climax of a vision moment, okay? Just offer it, explain what the organization does, why we love them, why we want to support them, and then give people a way to respond. And then you pay a lot of attention to who gives. So let me just give you some examples of this. And I'll just kind of unpack one of these. I have hundreds of churches are doing something like this, and I've helped a lot of them figure out this idea. So a lot of us do it on the fourth Sunday, and we call it $4 for others, or something similar to that. The idea is every dollar you give today for our, whatever the organization is gonna go to support what they're doing, their mission, their vision, something they're specifically wanting to do. We're gonna pay all the overhead. There is no overhead. We're gonna pay the credit card fees, and we want 100% participation. $4 is all we're asking. If everybody would do that, we will make a significant contribution to, again, the organization, and here's what it's gonna go to do. Now, again, that is so easy, right? You can have a QR code. You need a drop-down little menu maybe in your giving, online giving. You could have little envelopes made where people can put cash or check. Not that anybody carries that anymore, but there are so many ways to do this. But the goal is we want to make it really easy, the dollar figure very low, very achievable. And here's what you're going to discover. You're going to discover lots of people who have never given to anything at your church before are going to give to this. And you are going to build trust with them because of it. And if you pay close attention to the list, you'll be able to follow up with them via email. And of course, you're not going to say, you have never given before and I just saw. Like, they don't know that, right? But you're going to be able to follow up with these non-givers who have now taken a very first step. And you're going to discover lots of people who are in your church, and maybe they've been there for months and years, and they have been waiting for something that felt safe enough to try, and you just gave them that thing. And this is such a big deal because the first step really, really matters. Now, here's what most churches might make a mistake in, though, right? So you design like a really reasonable on-ramp, and you see these first-time givers kind of raise their hand, they respond, and then we don't do anything with that. So what we don't want to think of this like a pipeline. We want to enter people into the pipe, but we don't want them to stagnate in the pipe. A clogged pipe never leads to anything good. So we want to make sure we have a way to continue to move them through the pipe. And we do that by planning our next steps with them. So the people who gave, they don't just get absorbed back into the general congregation and we don't follow up or anything, right? That first gift is a signal to us. And it's a signal that they trusted us. And because of that trust, in generosity specifically, because of that generosity trust, we want to follow up and help them trust us as a church, not just giving through our church for this specific organization, for this specific reason. So generosity is an ongoing decision, and so it really has to be earned over and over again. So what do you do after a first gift, or what you do, I guess, after that first gift determines whether a person is more or less open to give again. So here's what I would recommend you do. I would recommend you write a personal note, not a form letter, write a personal note, something that acknowledges them and thanks them specifically. I would send them an email that gives them a very specific update about what the money did and why the organization is so grateful. In fact, if you are connected well to the organization or whatever it is, maybe the director of the nonprofit could write a short paragraph thank you, and they could say thank you, and they could talk about why that generosity, why their gift really made a difference. Again, if it's the scholarship fund for student camps or something, talk about why student camps are catalytic moments for kids and what's going to happen. And here, there's just so many ways to make this personal, right? And I would also acknowledge it from stage. I would honor not the individuals who gave, but I would honor the moment without kind of turning it into some stewardship setup thing. Like let the response be the story. And don't kind of make the story a funnel immediately to a next, kind of next ask. Like just allow the trust to grow, protect that trust, and then build on that trust. And here's what happens over time. These non-givers become, and I like to call these people tippers when they take those first steps, but those non-givers become tippers who then can become ministry givers to your church. And they do that by accumulating safety through trust. That's the principle here. And so what you really are responsible for is designing an environment where that kind of accumulation can actually happen. Think of it this way. You can't force anybody to give, but you can create the context that is really conducive for trust and safety to exist. And that's what's going to move people to take a step. So your non-givers, listen, they are not a problem. They're really your next big movement opportunity. And if you could design for them instead of against them, things are going to happen. In fact, the door that you build for them this month might be the thing that changes their entire relationship with generosity, with the church, and with God. And that is not a small thing. Spiritual formation involves financial trust, right? And you don't have to have a campaign to do all this, as I said. It just requires a different kind of design. So create that doorway, pay attention to see who walks through it, and then treat that first step really like what it actually is, the beginning of a journey for people. Hey, thanks for joining me for that conversation today. And hey, if this was helpful, a couple of things. One, I'd love for you to share it with other pastors that you know of that might benefit from it. And if you need any help working through any of these ideas, I'd love for you to shoot me an email, gavin@gavinadams.com. I answer all those emails. They come directly to me, and I love answering them. And this is something that I actually do think tanks on. Those are free. I talk about financial stuff a lot in think tanks, and I do leadership labs. Those are kind of cohorts with like-minded pastors in churches. They are limited to about 6, 7, 8 churches, though. So if you want to be a part of one of those, just go to the website, gavinadams.com. You can learn a lot more about think tanks, leadership labs, and kind of how I help churches in this financial space. Hey, talk to you next time.